Всем привет, с вами Юлька Радуга, и мы с вами продолжаем прохождение игры The Stanley Parable. Так, мы с вами уже открыли, получается, 5 возможных концовок этой игры. Я уже даже не знаю, куда мы можем еще пойти, вроде... Дверь налево мы вроде... Ой, направо точнее. Мы вроде рассмотрели все возможные концовки. Давайте посмотрим, может быть, у нас что-то оставилось здесь, в этой двери. О, нормальный офис. Как это необычно.
Feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there.
Да, у нас здесь еще есть лестница вниз.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
Так, тут ничего.
But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss. Admitting he had left his post during work hours, he might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, why had he taken that risk? All because he believed everyone had vanished. His boss would think he was crazy. And then something occurred to Stanley. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe I am crazy. All of my co-workers blinking mysteriously out of existence in a single moment for no reason at all. None of it made any logical sense. And as Stanley pondered this, he began to make other strange observations. For example, why couldn't he see his feet when he looked down? Why did doors close automatically behind him wherever he went? And for that matter, these rooms were starting to look pretty familiar. Were they simply repeating? No, Stanley said to himself, this is all too strange, this can't be real. And at last, he came to the conclusion that had been on the tip of his tongue. He just hadn't found the words for it. I'm dreaming, he yelled. This is all a dream. Oh, what a relief Stanley felt to have finally found an answer, an explanation. His co-workers weren't actually gone. He wasn't going to lose his job. He wasn't crazy after all. And he thought to himself, I suppose I'll wake up soon. I'll have to go back to my boring real-life job pushing buttons. I may as well enjoy this while I'm still lucid. So, he imagined himself flying and began to gently float above the ground. Then he imagined himself soaring through space on a magical starfield, and it too appeared. It was so much fun, and Stanley marveled that he had still not woken up. How was he remaining so lucid? And then perhaps the strangest question of them all entered Stanley's head. One he was amazed he hadn't asked himself sooner. Why is there a voice in my head dictating everything that I'm doing and thinking? Now the voice was describing itself being considered by Stanley, who found it particularly strange. I'm dreaming about a voice describing me, thinking about how it's describing my thoughts, he thought. And while he thought it all very odd and wondered if this voice spoke to all people in their dreams, the truth was that, of course, this was not a dream. How could it be? Was Stanley simply deceiving himself, believing that if he's asleep he doesn't have to take responsibility for himself? Stanley is as awake right now as he's ever been in his life. Now hearing the voice speak these words was quite a shock to Stanley. After all, he knew for certain, beyond a doubt, that this was in fact a dream. Did the voice not see him float and make the magical stars just a moment ago? How else would the voice explain all that? This voice was a part of himself too. Surely, if he could just... He would prove it. He would prove that he was in control, that this was a dream. So he closed his eyes gently, and he invited himself to wake up. He felt the cool weight of the blanket on his skin, the press of the mattress on his back, the fresh air of a world outside this one. Let me wake up, he thought to himself. I'm through with this dream. I wish it to be over. Let me go back to my job. Let me continue pushing the buttons. Please, it's all I want. I want my apartment, and my wife, and my job. All I want is my life exactly the way it's always been. My life is normal. I am normal. Everything will be fine. I am okay. Stanley began screaming. Please, someone, wake me up. My name is Stanley. I have a boss. I have an office. I am real. Please, just someone tell me I am real. I must be real. I must be. Can anyone hear my voice? Who am I? Who am I? And everything went black. This is the story of a woman named Mariella. Mariella woke up on a day like any other. She arose, got dressed, gathered her belongings, and walked to her place of work. But on this particular day, her walk was interrupted by the body of a man who had stumbled through town talking and screaming to himself, and then collapsed dead on the sidewalk. And although she would soon turn to go call for an ambulance, for just a few brief moments she considered the strange man. He was obviously crazy, this much she knew. Everyone knows what crazy people look like. And in that moment, she thought to herself how lucky she was to be normal. I am sane. I am in control of my mind. I know what is real and what isn't. It was comforting to think this, and in a certain way, seeing this man made her feel better. But then she remembered the meeting she had scheduled for that day. The very important people whose impressions of her would affect her career, and by extension, the rest of her life. She had no time for this, so it was only a moment that she stood there, staring down at the body. And then she turned and ran.
Так, и это, видимо, наша концовочка уже 6-я. Так, ну я даже не могу представить, что у нас тут еще может быть. Давайте посмотрим.
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo.
Так, это мы ходили налево.
When Stanley came
Направо у
to a
нас
set
все,
of two
поэтому
open
опять идем
doors, he
налево.
entered the door on his left.
Быть может, там, где директор, начальник, может быть, там есть какой-то еще вариант.
Yet there was not a single person here either. Feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there. Stanley stepped into the broom closet, but there was nothing here, so he turned around and got back on track.
Слушайте, а я не знала, что он открывается. Вообще случайно
There was
решила.
nothing here. No choice to make, no path to follow, just an empty broom closet. No reason to still be here.
А мы можем... Ага, мы закрылись.
It was baffling that Stanley was still just sitting in the broom closet. He wasn't even doing anything. At least if there was something to interact with, he'd be justified in some way. As it is, he's literally just standing there doing sweet FA.
Нифига не делал. Ладно, пойдемте на второй
Coming
этаж.
to a
Или куда-то
staircase,
многоэтажный,
Stanley
я даже не
walked
знаю.
upstairs to his boss's office.
Блин, я уж обрадовалась, думала, мы можем теперь дверь открывать. Так, тут ничего. Так, тут тоже ничего. Так, это компьютер-секретарша, наверное, его. Не проходит. Пухлый Стенли.
Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this, what dark secret was being held from him. What he could not have known was that the keypad behind the boss's desk guarded the terrible truth that his boss had been keeping from him. And so the boss had assigned it an extra secret pin number,
2845.
2845. But of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this.
Так, ну... Ладно, давайте наберем код, может там есть какой-то еще вариант. 2, 8, 4, 5.
Yet incredibly, by simply pushing random buttons on the keypad, Stanley happened to input the correct code
Может,
by
еще какая-то
sheer
дверь
luck.
открылась, кроме этой?
Amazing. He stepped into the newly opened passageway.
Ну, фиг знает все-таки. Может, у директора была не одна тайна. Так, камера. Нифига себе окна, конечно, размером. Пипец. Так. Ну ладно, пойдемте туда. Может, здесь какая-то еще есть. Так, блин, вот мне на экране темно, не видно, но кажется... Да, дальше мы... О, господи. Так, дальше мы не можем идти. У нас же там есть... А, точно, я же совсем забыла. У нас еще одна есть вариация. Это не выключать эту машину. Точно вспомнила. Значит, сейчас надо будет быстренько, шустренько пробежать. В принципе, будет логичное завершение таких всех этих концовок возможных.
Stanley realized he felt a bit peculiar. It was a stirring of emotion in his chest, as though he felt more free to think for himself, to question the nature of his job. Why did he feel this now, when for years it had never occurred to him? This question would not go unanswered for long.
Так.
Stanley
Так,
walked
здесь
straight
вроде
ahead
больше
through the
ничего
large
нету.
door that read Mind Control Facility.
Опа, escape. А я не видела.
Although this passageway had the word escape written on it, the truth was that at the end of this hall, Stanley would meet his violent death.
Жестокая смерть.
The door behind him was not shut. Stanley still had every opportunity to turn around and get back on track.
Но нет уж, давайте. Да там нет двери, по-моему.
At this point, Stanley was making a conscious, concerted effort to walk forward and willingly confront his death.
Не, мужик, давай уж посмотрим все концовки. И это все? И где это он?
As the machine whirred into motion and Stanley was inched closer and closer to his demise, he reflected that his life had been of no consequence whatsoever. Stanley can't see the bigger picture.
Ах ты же
He doesn't
етить.
know the real story, trapped forever in his narrow vision of what this world is. Perhaps his death was
Ёлы-палы.
of
А
no great
присесть не
loss,
поможет?
like plucking the eyeballs from a blind man. So he resigned and willingly accepted this violent end to his brief and shallow life.
Ой, ё.
Stanley,
Какого фига вы такие машины делаете?
Farewell, Stanley, cried the narrator, as Stanley was led helplessly into the enormous metal jaws. In a single visceral instant, Stanley was obliterated as the machine crushed every bone in his body, killing him instantly.
Но мы же еще живы, как так? Это, видимо, решили нам не показывать. Я, если честно, не знаю, как расценивать, это концовка или нет, или... Ну, видимо, да. Видимо, нас то ли тетка какая-то спасла. А может быть, просто реально цензуру как бы не стали там... Слишком уж так И так бедного. За психа все считают ненормального. Может быть, просто не стали его убивать. Ну что ж, тогда давайте посчитаем, что, в общем, это у нас уже... Боюсь сбиться, но, если не ошибаюсь, уже 7-я концовка. А может быть, нет. Поэтому в описании, короче, в названии будет написана какая-то уже концовка по счету. Вот. Ну что ж, наверное, уже следующая часть будет завершающая, где мы решим не выключать эту машину и посмотрим, что же будет. Так, всем спасибо за внимание. С вами была Юлька Радуга. Пока-пока.